there are still no hard facts regarding the cause of the terrible accident that took place this morning in the town of Rachel, Nevada. A school bus carrying 40 students from Clover High School overturned, turning what should have been an ordinary school trip into a tragedy. Unfortunately, 2 deaths have already been confirmed. At the time of the accident, a series of unexplained tremors were reported in the neighboring area, causing extensive damage to buildings, and a growing sense of alarm among local residents. The causes of the incident are still unknown.
Horror games are having something of a renaissance in recent times, with the Resident Evil 2 remake as well as the stellar Resident Evil 7 Biohazard taking the franchise back to its roots, and even EA testing the waters with its fantastic remake of the original Dead Space. Even the indie space has seen some fun horror titles, like last year's wonderful Signalis. Developer Invader Studios is hoping to be part of this horror renaissance with the follow-up to its 2019 release Daymare 1998, Daymare 1994 Sandcastle. As its name might suggest, Daymare 1994 Sandcastle acts as a sort of prequel to its predecessor, giving us a look back at what exactly was going on in the world 4 years before the events of Daymare 1998. The story takes place in the eponymous year of 1994, with a trio of Hades agents heading out to Area 51 on a routine mission that goes horribly wrong. When it comes to gameplay, Daymare 1994 Sandcastle wears its influences right on its sleeves. Featuring an over-the-shoulder perspective, the game feels like a classic take on the Resident Evil 2 formula. The camera angle goes a long way in helping the game establish its tone and atmosphere, since your field of view is essentially funneled to focus almost entirely on what's right in front of you. Another excellent idea that the game borrows from Resident Evil 2 Remake is the ability to do a quick 180-degree turn, which helps quite a bit in tense combat encounters. Speaking of which, Daymare 1994 Sandcastle certainly features quite a bit of combat. After a slow build-up during the game's prologue, where you're essentially learning how to execute some of the game's puzzle-solving and exploration mechanics, Daymare 1994 quickly starts amping up the frequency with which you'll be getting into fights against the game's many nightmarish enemies. This is where the game offers up a first impression that doesn't really hold up the further you get into the game. Where the slow opening would indicate an experience more focused on exploration and atmosphere, it instead quickly devolves into constantly fighting things off. The combat itself, while quite a bit of fun once you get into the flow of switching between your weapons on time and making use of your frost grip ability, suffers from a distinct lack of variety in the equipment available to you. Where other action-oriented horror titles would offer you plenty of tools to at least have fun while you're running for your life from monstrous creatures, Daymare 1994 Sandcastle instead features a surprisingly limited arsenal. The game shows an inability to balance out its slower, tense moments with the heart-pounding action that most of the game essentially becomes. While this is by no means a bad thing, the pacing quite definitely suffers because of these choices. If the game is supposed to be an out-and-out action game, it should definitely lean into those ideas further than the slow, plodding setup parts of the prologue. When it comes to horror, the game doesn't really successfully pull off anything that might be even remotely scary. Most of Daymare 1994 revolves around poorly done jump scares, which is a real shame considering how well the game can manage to look spooky from a distance at least. The bleak corridors of Area 51, lit up only by flashing red lights and a couple of lamps that haven't had their bulbs blown out, can offer up quite a striking image. Sadly, all the atmosphere can't really help salvage the game's attempts at horror when every second corner you turn around will have a monster lurking there, while early in-game attempts at some jump scares can work quite well. The fuse box blowing up in the prologue comes to mind. Trying to use nothing but jump scares can only really get you so far, and ultimately, it falls to the action gameplay to help uplift the game. Sadly, Daymare 1994 Sandcastle also falters quite a bit with its combat. While visuals off, weapons look decent, and the enemies look fantastically monstrous, there are smaller issues that combine together to form a bigger problem. For example, many enemies just won't react to getting hit by your bullets. Sure, strong monsters shouldn't necessarily be taking much damage from your SMG, but at least a minor stagger animation would have been much better than what we have now. There's also the fact that you only really have access to 2 weapons during your entire playthrough, an SMG and a shotgun. That's right, you won't get any other weapons to play around with. Thanks to its poor attempts at horror while trying to focus on action gameplay, Daymare 1994 Sandcastle suffers quite a bit from poor pacing issues. While I first thought that these pacing issues would largely be limited to the game's opening hours, where it's still trying to introduce its premise and characters for you, even the mid-game period still showed quite a few problems with how Daymare 1994 paces out its combat encounters, with the slower, more exploration-focused puzzle elements. The premise of the game is surprisingly fun and grounds for a rather excellent adventure, thanks to the heavy thriller vibes it gives off. Hades' agent and protagonist, Delilah Reyes, is a fun character, and despite the title featuring incredibly goofy writing, the interactions between her and her fellow agents can range from fun to entertainingly nonsensical. The premise for the game starts off simple, but as in the case with just about any horror game out there, things can quickly get complicated once Reyes starts exploring deeper into the bowels of Area 51. There's even a contrived, surprisingly futuristic PDA called the DID that you can use as the ultimate tool, since not only does it let you manage your inventory and track your collected documents, but you can also use a standard USB cable to hack just about any highly classified government computer you find. Nothing in the game ever feels like it's meant to be taken too seriously. Daymare 1994 Sandcastle's biggest success, aside from the fun vibes of its story, is how well it manages to capture its time period. Aside from the ultra-futuristic DID, computers in the world of Daymare 1994 are beige, blocky things with massive keys on the keyboards, and a whole lot of dials next to screens giving off the soft interlaced glow of old-school CRT monitors. There's quite a bit of charm to be found in exploring a ruined government office filled with these old-timey computers, even if you're probably just going to get jumped by another monster. The game isn't free of technical issues in its visuals either. While the game itself feels and plays competently, cutscenes were strangely jittery, and the idea of lip-syncing for dialogue may as well be a concept as alien as several of the monsters you end up fighting. Even when playing on quality mode on the PS5, textures were surprisingly low resolution. Where it might fail on technical levels, however, Daymare 1994 Sandcastle succeeds in its artistic intentions by presenting some really good-looking tableaus to punctuate the key moments of your exploration through Area 51. Daymare 1994 Sandcastle is far from the perfect game. Plagued with technical problems as well as issues with fundamental design, it manages to be an average game thanks to the somewhat competent combat system. Sure, its story won't be taking home any awards, and you might only really have 2 weapons to play around with, but the game still manages to be all right in a pulpy kind of way. Daymare 1994 Sandcastle acts better as a period piece for the early 90s than it does a horror game. It focuses quite a bit on combat, but doesn't really give you any tools to play around with your enemies, and its attempts at horror are, at best, hilarious, and at worst, annoying. Thankfully, the story is the right kind of pulpy fun that's bound to get you through the game like it would a middling episode of a thriller series. And that brings us to the end of the video. A quick request: we upload new videos every single day, and if you like what we're doing, please consider subscribing. It really helps us out. Also, don't forget to enable all notifications by clicking the bell icon so that you can receive daily video updates. Thanks for watching.